Alright, sorry about that. Shouldn't have started when I was in the middle of eating and chewing something. Welcome back to another Let's Play in History. We are gonna do this next part, and we are gonna go and learn a little bit more about Mr. T-Dog himself, Teddy Roosevelt. Okay.
Hunter of the Abbey, may I formally introduce you to the Hellcat.
Is this different than the one you have at Shopclass?
The Hell Ride.
No. But this time it's just the three of us. I always like to show her to all my friends and just realized that we've been so busy getting back your mom's forces, I haven't had a chance to give you an up-close look at her. Gorgeous, right? Even without the extra hell sauce, she's a beast.
She is one of a kind,
He says I'm cool.
as are you.
Thanks, Hunter. You always make me feel like I'm part of this whole thing. Don't get me wrong. I love Nico and the rest of the Sons like family,
Now, Teddy Roosevelt.
but well, sometimes
Sorry, Robbie. We're gonna talk about Big Teddy T real quick.
rattling chains by night.
You know, before he and his family do the whole gallivanting across the world kind of thing, they were very well off. A couple things to note. Teddy Roosevelt actually saw Abraham Lincoln's funeral proceedings when it was going down in New York. It actually passes by his house. Little tidbit. I think he's about 8 when he sees Lincoln going down his street, which I always find pretty cool. And number 2, he was always fascinated by nature. I think it started because his family would take these trips to, I think it would be Martha's Vineyard or around that particular area, the New England coastline, and he would like fish for or see all the wildlife that was there and by the ocean, the clams, the flora. Really big into all that. Actually became a problem for his mother because he would just take home random things, and his mom would be like, okay, what did you bring home this time? Why do you have an eel with you? You know, like things like that. He's just super big into nature. I think being sickly makes him fascinated about the world, and I think his parents were a somewhat positive influence on that. I think being able to travel the world is also a positive influence. Because I think it gives you perspective, and I think for him, he saw things very, very differently than most people would, even at that time. I do have an artifact.
These were relatively common at one point in history.
Sweet. Now what can I research? Heroes deal extra damage from enemies to any enemies knocked into them. Cool, I can do that. Don't really care for that. So this one for sure we're doing. How many gamma coils do I have? So I at least get 1 or 2 a mission. Dark heal. But I take 24 damage.
Another magical mystery box.
Yeah, buddy. Just gonna do those 2. I'm all about that offense. I will say they are, again, a very well-off family. They're not like, oh my god, you know, rich, you know, but certainly far more than most families. I guess a good comparison is when his father dies, Teddy Roosevelt ends up getting an inheritance, which is about $60,000 to $70,000, which I think today it would be about $2 million. So you know they're doing pretty good, to be honest with you. I have plenty of attack essence. Ooh, I can chain 3. Yes, please.
Don't stress it too much. There's no wrong answers here.
This is heroic essence. Might as well. Oh, some more heroic essence. Might as well. Don't have enough, unfortunately. Okay. Now, what to do?
Are you lost? Hey, can I ask a favor? Oh, thanks, Hunter.
Who else do? Oh, I gotta find Spider-Man. Hey, where are you, buddy? Blade's there. Oh,
I have something for you.
Spider-Man fanfic my sloth baby.
Components for shop class.
I'm almost as good.
okay. Now we can do the actual mission. Teddy Roosevelt was always a wondrous child, wondrous young adult. He's always curious by things. Destroy device. So this one I just defeat enemies. I did say I was gonna do a mission. We gotta do a story mission, people.
There it is again. Strange gamma energy signature.
But he was always a curious kid. His family was deeply religious. I don't know about him. I think he's more agnostic, but his father was actually a minister, I think.
Can't get an answer.
Or at the very least, he was just a very devout. I think he was either Presbyterian or Methodist. But he would study actually Jesus while in college too, and Christian studies. I guess you would probably term it and call it. But growing up though, he was not physically fit until he was around his teenage years when the asthma got really bad, and his father, being a dad, was basically like, you are gonna die in this world if you don't improve. This world is not made to suit people like you. Contrasting that to what people deal with today, his father basically said, you either gotta deal with it, you gotta improve yourself, or you're gonna basically die, and I don't want that for you. That's a pretty solid team right here. Let's do it. So, basically, Teddy just changes and just realizes, maybe even panics, I need to do something with myself. I need to do something with my life. I don't want to live this life anymore. I refuse to be a sickly kid. Takes up running, which greatly improves his asthma. Takes up boxing. Does a whole bunch of these different things. Really athletically gifted young man and determined, and he's just one of those kids who every time he got punched down, he always got right back up. And if people took notice of that. Soon after, though, once they come back from their trips overseas, come back to New York, he's probably roughly around 17, 18 years old when they come back, and he ends up going to college. He actually goes to Harvard. He studies there for the next 2 or 3 years, again, doing all the stuff that he loves to do. Learns about science, religion, philosophy, does more boxing. I think he starts a boxing club, or is a part of a boxing club in college. And unfortunately for him, while he is in college, his father passes away a couple years in, where he basically ends up getting the big inheritance. It was a really devastating loss in his life, which is understandable. Which is understandable for him, considering the fact that's one of the big figures in his life, and at least for the time being too, he started going back to the church even more so, probably in remembrance and honor of his father, although I think Harvard at the time didn't have any Presbyterian churches, so he ended up going to an Episcopalian church, ends up basically becoming Episcopalian, so I had to defeat all the enemies. Okay.
No, no, please. Come, examine the device closely. I think you'll find it's not so easy to dismiss this time
Shot to the heart, and you're too late, darling. You give love bad name. But in school, he quite literally does everything. I mean, that's not even a joke. He literally does everything. He's a part of the rowing club. He's a part of a bunch of fraternities, actually. Flying Club. If they had like a golf club, he's probably there too. Like, quite literally everything. I will say this too. There's a couple biographers that always point out that, you know, while he did learn a lot, you know, ultimately his time at Harvard, despite doing all these incredible things, was like one of the most boring aspects of his life, and the fact that he really probably didn't attain as much as one would think in school. So I can't see him. I don't know how that works, but okay. I think he wanted to be by an area attack. Okay.
Once my device disintegrates, great Captain Marvel, the others will have no choice but to listen. In that fool, will be forced to acknowledge my greatness. Mother will be so pleased.
I think my hunter's gonna be down.
Not as happy as I'll be when I deliver my
Really?
to your face.
Actually, Tony, you're gonna move right here. You're gonna blast this guy. He's trying to hide like a wussy. He wanted to be a biologist in the future. He wanted to be a historian. But I think because of the financials, he ends up 60. Good lord. He ends up changing his tune, ends up becoming a lawyer. So he goes from Harvard to Columbia Law School. Moves back home with his... hear about my boy real quick. And what's funny is he's studying law and he's writing a book on he's studying law and writing a book on the War of 1812, which is really, really funny. He's also getting into politics at this time, getting into meetings with the political elites of that particular area. And I'll say this too, he's always been someone who was for a lot of the Republican causes, ends up helping a lot of local candidates end up actually winning a bunch of positions.
I see your target.
saw a move like that once, centuries ago.
And I think the Republican Party saw that. They took to him pretty succinctly. They were all big fans of Teddy Roosevelt and
This one thinks there's
his abilities and his energy. He was big and made close friends with the Ross Conkling's wing of the New York Republican Party.
It will most certainly be able to achieve our
This is probably overkill.
risk is worth the reward.
Ah, dang
I'm
it. That's not what I
certain
wanted.
Mother will understand.
Yes, my mother is known for her patience and understanding.
now that's some grade A hero quality sarcasm you got going there.
Like I said, he was basically writing books around this particular point in time. One of these books being a book on the War of 1812. Specifically, he wrote like a bunch of, specifically the naval wars during the War of 1812. I think he would write probably at least several dozen books over his time as. Let me just heal you real quick so you don't immediately die. An astute historian, I would definitely say.
I'm on it.
I'm basically just skipping this turn for right now. There's more of them come. Now, while in school, I forgot. I think he might have met her when he was in Harvard. He met a brilliant young socialite by the name of Alice Lee, I think her name was, and he's pretty smitten with her. They have a very brilliant relationship. You know, he's Teddy. He's bully. Very devastating, unfortunately, for the Roosevelt family is that they have one daughter, Alice Lee Roosevelt, who herself is a fire starter. Although I think she has a completely terrible relationship with her father, for reasons being because Teddy Roosevelt is Teddy Roosevelt, and does all the Teddy Roosevelt things and neglects being a parent. But Teddy Roosevelt's wife, Alice Lee, ends up passing away. I think she ends up having either kidney or liver failure after giving birth to their daughter. And it's also unfortunate, like, when that happened, too, his mother passes away, too, because of typhoid. And the famous line, the light has gone out in my life. Imagine being 22 and losing both your parents and your wife after having your first child. It's probably not the best. Gives care of his daughter to his sister. He ends up regaining custody of her when she's about 3 or 4 years old. But definitely, so capture the enemy agent before they flee.
Hydra forces in this area are causing trouble. Let's take them down.
As they say, no problem.
See, you brought some friends along.
Let's see if I can knock you back. Heh. Holy crap. I didn't think it was gonna be like that. And I think for Teddy, the death of his wife, his mother, basically made him into a borderline madman, almost, in terms of just focusing squarely and purely on pretty much everything else other than his family. He focuses so much more so.
The Dark Book. It's the great Dr. Faustus at a loss for words.
So much more so on Republican politics, continues writing the books, really starts fighting corruption. You know, maybe you could probably argue that
Now's our chance. Take Faustus into custody before he can regain his bearings.
broken, he's capturing. Oh. Okay, can we... Can I use the capture agent card? There we go. Yeah, I'm man.
Excellent. Hydra won't let us
But
take
like,
it so easily, though.
I think for, you know, crazed individuals who are very corrupt politicians and financiers and just those types of people, like, the worst thing that could probably happen, honestly, is that Teddy Roosevelt's wife and mother passes away, where he goes so full force into pretty much everything that it leads to just complete and utter just ferociousness from Teddy Roosevelt. Like, Jay Gould is a big Republican, let's just say corrupt financier and politician of that time and era. And he's basically like, you are going down, bro. I am taking you out with me. Or I'm not taking you out, but like I'm taking you down, son. Like, it's gonna go down. Like, you can't hide from me anymore, basically. And pretty much uses all of his tools, tactics, and powers to basically just become one of the most outspoken Republicans and individuals when it comes to the general and genuine political machine that was growing and getting larger and larger at the time. Can I heal? Level up. Don't have enough heroism, but I can heal myself. Now I can heal Tony. I should also point out, too, he's a part of the New York State Assembly at this point. He wins and easily runs and wins his re-election bid and just becomes the prominent New York politician. I mean, he's basically doing everything he can to make New York as good for his family as humanly possible, put it that way. He was so prominent that effectively he in specifically in New York politics, he was so prominent that Radiance. He was so prominent as a politician that one could argue he actually swayed the elections, subsequent elections, in 1884, almost, like, because he's such a big prominent New York politician that and he was completely against people like James G. Blaine, Chester A. Arthur, most of those guys getting in. He just didn't like Arthur, which is also another reason why I don't like Arthur. Had a big hand in getting a bunch of people the nomination. He wasn't the biggest fan of James G. Blaine, but ultimately had enough sway that he actually could get him the votes needed to win the convention. Yes, sir. Boom.
Lilith has sent you here to die. I hope you are prepared.
Yeah, and I'm being serious. He did not like James G. Blaine. He did not like entrenched politicians, which I always find interesting. But once Blaine ultimately does win the nomination, Roosevelt's basically like, this town's too corrupt, screw it, I am outie, like a belly button, it's outie. And it's becoming a cattle rancher in the Dakota territory, hunts for bison, bull mooses and stuff like that. Becomes just an investor. He invests in everything from cattle to ranching, other politics stuff that goes on in New York. And for the next several years, he's basically going back and forth between his ranch in the Dakotas and New York. And from my understanding, the ranch wasn't very financially successful, so it was kind of like a sunk cost. I just think he wanted to be a cowboy and wear the cowboy hats, you know, and go into the Badlands and whatnot. So I think the problem with people like him is like he's never lived that lifestyle, doesn't really understand it. He'd say he can, but it's just in fact, at one point in one of those years, his cattle all ended up dying basically because of a really bad winter, because he just didn't know how to take care of them. I mean, pretty much loses like the equivalency of today, like $2 million just from ranching, which is just insane. But also around this time, he ends up getting remarried again to actually an old childhood friend from New York. Her name was Edith. He was hesitant to remarry, even though it's been like 6 years, primarily because he just thought he was cursed with bad luck in that way. Not to mention, too, just, you know, the feelings and whatnot, but his sisters were kind of against the marriage initially. I think they ended up relenting. Edith and him get married around 1888. They have like 5 more kids. And Alice, the first daughter, did not like it. Did not like her stepmom. I think that should also be noted as well. There's so much going on with this game, I swear.
Let me guess. Could not sleep. Starting to become a common theme here.
It was not always the case. The Abbey was once a different place. I was happy here once.
Well, that is something.
Also one of the few presidents to actually marry outside the country. He remarried in England.
Lately, as Nico says. It is just that for so many nights now, every time I close my eyes, all I see is Wanda, drowning within darkness, calling to me. I do not think I will ever sleep again. Not until we find her.
Losing a comrade is always traumatic. It is perfectly normal to dream about her.
I am not just dreaming about her. She is reaching out to me. I could
God, this game is super weird.
hear her crying out for help as if she was in the same room. Such anguish in her voice. It's a sound I will never forget. Like me, you also have a connection to the darkness, Hunter.
He attempts to run for mayor of New York. Once he gets married, he comes back into more of a public life, because he was basically gone and secluded for the better part of 3 or 4 years. loses the mayoral bid, unfortunately, to the more liberal causes.
All you want, Hunter. But I've heard you
Ends up leaving the
bring up to your mind.
leaving New York again for a little bit.
I know you dream about
Writes a book, becomes a best-selling book. Becomes like
all that matters is
kind of
to
like
find
a little like JD Vance-ish a little bit in a lot of ways, where kind of doesn't really do too much, and then writes a book, and then becomes a prominent individual, an outspoken individual. A lot of people like him.
Hey there, Hunter. You have a minute to spare?
What is troubling you, Tony?
Oh, I don't know.
Two things happen. Benjamin Harrison beats Blaine for the Republican National Convention nomination in, I believe, 1888. This is in part because of Teddy Roosevelt, I would argue. I don't think he really liked him specifically, but he had enough pull to where he ends up getting him help with the nomination. I also think Teddy Roosevelt did it too, despite not liking Harrison too much, was because he did want a position within the government, and I think he wanted to specifically revitalize his political career. It looks good. I mean, and no one's better at making speeches and stumping for people than Teddy Roosevelt was. People would call him belligerently enthusiastic, as a lot of people have attributed to him. Because of this, once Harrison does win the election and beats Grover Cleveland, he's appointed to the United States Civil Service Commission to try and weed out to actually do the things that they were supposed to be doing and weed out corruption, etc., etc. I did the mission, so let's just go to bed. I think it's time for bed. And I will say this is a very, very good choice that Harrison made. And Grover Cleveland, when he does win re-election, actually keeps Teddy Roosevelt at his same post, which I find very interesting, despite being ideologically opposed in certain ways. But he was an actual fire starter, fired a lot of people, pretty much held people accountable. It's crazy. Just a real, like, shit starter. Pardon my language. Once he leaves in 1895, because he wants to go back to New York, he thinks about running for mayor again. I think he believes he doesn't have a real shot. Probably losing has something to do with that. Ends up just running for the New York City Police Commissioner, which is funny because he wanted to fix the police force. So he ends up winning that position. Actually, I think it's because his buddy wins the election of the mayor, actually, mayoralship, and gives him the commission to be police commissioner. Isn't that crazy? This guy does everything. It's pretty wild, this dude.
Hey, Hunter. Got a minute to talk?
Why can't I talk to you?
What was on your mind, Robbie?
Fear, anxiety, doubt, a bunch of feel-good thoughts and feelings about where this team is headed.
And again, quite literally, was the single most astute police commissioner I think New York City has ever had. I mean, there's stories about him like actually going on police beats and police routines. Like he would just like walk up randomly and be like, just want to make sure you're on duty. Carry on, gentlemen. Like he was that kind of dude. It's pretty crazy.
The Avengers are so preoccupied with reaching Banner. But I bet no one would notice if I took off and joined Hydra or just, I don't know, disappeared.
Robbie, everyone here would notice, including me.
I'm not so sure about that.
I am. If you were to fall off the map, I would toil day and night to find you.
Yeah. guess you are pretty stand up that way.
Now,
Well, I guess I should go find Peter.
when McKinley becomes president,
Take my
McKinley
mom's
appoints
place, you know?
Roosevelt as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
See you later.
What the heck? Okay.
Hunter,
Really? Okay, you know what? I'm gonna stop this part right now real quick. I know it's very abrupt. God bless, like and subscribe. Y'all rock. We'll continue real quick, real soon, promise. There you go.